welcome to yet another thought-provoking episode of Motlhophi BUA, Vote to Speak. My name is Duma FM, the host of this election podcast, brought to you by Bokongo in partnership with Duma FM and the Embassy of the United States of America in Gaborone. Tsatsi la gompieno kgang e leng gore ra itsweleledisa ke yone go ka tlhodimela maitlamo a diphathi tsa sepolotiki jaaka re tsamaela ko ditlhophong tsa lefatshe la Botswana. Re le ka go tlhaloganya gore di bua di reng malebana le yone kgang e ya tshenyetso setšhaba kana corruption. And we're going to also look at the issue of governance in Botswana to see how different political parties fare in terms of being expressive in their respective manifestos. Tsatsi la gompieno ke yone kgang e ke eletsang gore le wena o tlo nne teng go ka bua le rona ka yone gore re tle re tlhaloganye botoka gore mo nako e re buang ka yone tse e leng gore di a buiwa tse e leng gore di buega mo maitlamong a diphathi ke dilo di tshwana leng. Mme ga ke nosi tsatsi la gompieno gore setšhaba sone ga se lebile kganye se bona ka tsela ntseng jang, we're going to be looking at electoral accountability. So those are going to be woven topics into our conversation today. Me gongwe pele re ka tsamaela kgakala gongwe re lebelle seemo se e leng gore kopana le sone mo lefatsheng la Botswana. So Kabo, ga re lebella kgang ya corruption, a situational overview of where we are as a country. O ka re ka re le ha kae, how strong or weak are our governance systems?
According to Transparency International indices or the index thing, Botswana in the latest ranking it got 39 out of 180 countries, which means Botswana in our score 59 out of 100. But that is a drop by one place compared to that of 2022. But if you look at Botswana generally over the years, Botswana has been ranked as one of among the few least corrupt countries in Africa. But if you look at that and you weigh it against what obtains in the ground or reality, Botswana bone Habantse ba interview yalo ke bana batho ba Afro barometer yalo le lona ke be le gore ke ba itsana pe Botswana ba supa gore there is corruption aggregate perception ba supa gore there is corruption. But if you look at gongwe seemo sa yone hela generally mo Botswana, the units tse le gore or institutions tse le gore they've been established by the government like your DCC gongwe bo FIA, but how effective maybe are they in terms of curbing your corruption? I think maybe that is the conversation that would have going forward.
Right. And Ikobeng, I want to look to you. Rentse re utlwa ka perception index. Mo go rang gore ke ka ha motho a kanyetsang kgang ya teng ka teng. Wena ga o ilebile kgang ya tshenyetso setšhaba mo Botswana, a o ka dumalana gongwe le dipatlisiso maduo a dipatlisiso tse e le gore ne di dirwa ke Transparency International in that you concur gore corruption tota re tsamaela maswe mo lefatsheng la Botswana?
As he indicated, according to...
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, we're going to try to get that one taken care of. When I just hang tight while we sort it out. In terms of Kanya, we're looking at what political parties oftentimes talk about. And that is strengthening of anti-corruption institutions. They talk about issues of transparency. They talk about issues of promoting good governance. The true test ke go ka diragatsa maitlamo na go nna jalo. So ke batla gore kgang eo re tle re sekaseke mmogo gore first of all, are they vocal about yona kgang ya corruption? If it's seen to be that serious, are they treating it as an issue e leng gore it's a serious matter?
Well, from where I'm standing, Ramotei, ke dumela gore this issue of corruption is not given the attention that it deserves, because if you look at gongwe Haubala, the budget speech, we tell gore corruption gongwe maybe there's just one line about corruption gore gongwe government we itama gore a go ilwantsha. If you look at the SONA, the State of the Nation address, we tell gore this is just two lines tse le gore gongwe if you look at the political party manifestos, most of them have gone through BDP, UDC, BCP, there isn't much really in terms of how these political parties intend to curb corruption. For instance, if you look at the BDP, what they are saying, Barry in the 2024 manifesto, they intend to establish the corruption courts. They intend to achieve what you call regular corruption disclosures. They are going to promote public education. They are going to declare corruption a high-level crime. They are going to ensure that corruption they are going to ensure that anti-corruption bodies, which means your DCC, they report directly to Parliament. In terms of trying to promote good governance and curbing issues of corruption, they are going to try to the power and empower those institutions. DCCC. But I think all in all, Remote, I think there is more work that needs to be done this issue of corruption, because Botswana ba lela madia sengwarra ke di litsi, but ha re ke re bona any prosecution go tenya motho o sentse ebile le khota le mmone molato. Re ka ha se kae gongwe go kile ga nna lo le ditsheko tsa bo NPF, re bone gore ha gona ope le gore ha re bua gompiekwana go ne go te 250 million from the National Petroleum Fund o nyeletse ga nna le dikai tsa bo CMB, Capital Management, e le gore le one madi a di-pensionera go ne go te a nyeletse. But gompiekwana, if you look at the success rate ya kokot, it's really worrisome.
Yeah. So in essence, I mean, political parties are just, mentioning some of these things as rhetoric for political mileage, kana electoral support. Me, in actual fact, ho sa bona le go lekane gore ba dira sengwe ka seno gore ba se bua. Well, let's look at in terms of clarity, in terms of concreteness of the implementation plan. Yeah, tsone di parties politiki, in terms of their commitments, or is it just vague and maybe ambiguous as to how they're going to implement some of those things in terms of anti-graft or anti-corruption drives or campaigns?
I think general because there is no political party modi manifestos it comes up with really a clear law to say we are going to pass or enact such a law so that we can curb corruption. Haraka boela ko marago gongwe go kile ga nna le mo Botswana go kile ga nna le this declaration of assets and liabilities it was passed by a parliament. Raizo do gona ga nna lo the back and forth ya sontso re go implementiwe gompiekwana. Nobody knows what is the latest regarding the declaration of asset and liabilities. Ane mema parliament, the minister and all these high-ranking senior government officials, do they even declare what is the current standing? Because mola wa teng gape no incriminate gore whoever can disclose that gongwe to ba bega dikhankana yang wa go tsela dikgato bo bona gore ke molao gongwe gone go te is in line with curbing corruption, but at the same time it doesn't seem to be really achieving that which it was intended for.
Right. Tla ke boele go wena Ikobeng, go hale no santse o tla tlhalosa le wena gore wena o bona dilo di ntse ka tseleng jang. Go tle go te perception breeds reality, or perception is somewhat linked with reality ya motho eleng gore o leba dilo ka tseleng jalo. So wena o ka tlhalosa gore o leba jang khanya ya tshenyo setšhaba?
I actually share the same sentiment. I believe that we believe that corruption is on the rise. We see it because day in and day out, we see headlines on newspapers and we read them about the National Petroleum Fund scandal and other scandals and nothing is being done about it. And these organizations like Transparency International and Afrobarometer, they conduct surveys and they collect data to show what is happening on the ground, what Botswana feel and believe regarding governance and corruption. I believe that in Botswana we have this mentality if I do something for you, you need to scratch my back as well. And it's something that we need to completely do away with. Now, when it comes to our leaders, it's very important for them to not just talk about these things and their commitment to fighting corruption and not do anything about it. Because these corruption scandals, oftentimes they surround the political leaders and all these people in the upper echelons of society. We need a top-down approach, as he talked about, declaring your assets and being committed, not just academically or in your manifestos. We need to see a tangible way in which you demonstrate you're committed to fighting corruption. This can be through your political parties. Do you review your constitutions? How are people being appointed in your positions? Is it due to populism, or is it because these people have certain credentials? We need to see them walking the talk and not just doing this whenever there's time to elect our leaders into positions of power. We also need to see these oversight institutions having some sort of independence. Because of it all, the president is appointing the DPP and the Secretary General of the IEC. It casts aspersions. The voter ko gae o na le that sense of doubt gore ao ke le ikobeng gracious selelo anka go appointa, and then ebe ke go ha tiro gore o ncheke gape gore am I doing the right thing. Obviously there are going to be those insinuations or those beliefs that gore go na le corruption, and we see it. Now our economy is being affected by various things. Some even speculate that we're going into a recession. With corruption adding onto it, it depletes the resources that exist, and it trickles down to the ordinary Motswana to the extent whereby my grandmother can't get medication due to the fact that healthcare professionals, there's a shortage of them because of corruption, because of the funds that are being depleted. So it boils down to that, walking the talk and making sure that you emulate whatever it is that you're advocating for.
Right. Ke batla gore ke boledise kgang ya what I think you're alluding to in terms of public trust. Go ka nna le tshepo mo makgotleng one a ileng gore a itebagantse le kgang ya tshenyetso ya setšhaba. Gore what would bring that public trust? What would lend itself to growing the trust e leng gore batho ba na le yone mo se e leng gore se buiwa ke one makgotla a sepolotiki in terms of corruption? Because the erosion of trust is in not acting, or these implementation gaps. So ke batla go tlhaloganya gore ke eng hela beyond that would bring somewhat of trust from a public's point of view.
Okay, from my point of view as a voter, to win over our trust would mean that our political leaders, they need to be able to effectively detect these people who engage in corrupt activities. They need to be able to detect, apprehend, and actually prosecute them. For there to be a spirit of deterrence, it means that there has to be an example where I can point to and say, if I steal this amount of money, then these are the repercussions of that action. We need to see these things actually bearing tangible results at the end of the day. That is how that they'll be able to win the trust of us as a society, because there's a social contract between us, the voters, and the people who are in power. We put you into power so that you can be able to manage the country's resources in a way that is effective and equitable and just. So if at all you want to win over my trust, you just basically need to implement what you said you would do for me. When you campaigned, you promised me these results. So if at all you're going to win over my trust, you need to actually walk the talk, like I actually stated earlier on.
Right. Gabo, walking the talk. I mean, that translates to acting in such a way that shows that so not just identifying it to be urgent, but acting as if it's urgent. What would actually bring out a sense of seriousness beyond just the rhetoric ya go bua gore corruption is in everyday aspects of our lives, and yeah, earlier on off camera we were talking about and that starts, or that's the kind of conversation so something so pervasive, something so deep-rooted, something so deep-seated within our own conduct,
I think first and foremost, we need to really achieve a paradigm shift in terms of the way we view corruption. This mentality wa njesa sengwe kana no sa drinki kana okupa mongwe thuso boro tama no sa drink. I think that is where we get it wrong. So if we are to achieve a paradigm shift in terms of how we view corruption, we need to view corruption as a scourge, that which is bleeding African governments, that which is bleeding the world, a scourge that which is holding as a ransom. E le gore e re gogela marago dithabololo ka bontsi ha o ipona hela go o ngongorega ka tsela o re go na le diphotholo kana gongwe diroboto ga di bereke kana sepatela sengwe bo ngaka kana bo nnese ba shota me o tolerate corruption. Always you are part of the problem in the greater scheme of things, because madi a le gore we lose as a country, or maybe Africa as a continent, or the world globally due to corruption, is the money that could be going into the social aspects of our lives, improving our education and so forth and so on. So we need to achieve that paradigm shift to say how do we view corruption? How charges ka speed trap o ipona go gala le police ka thoko o le neela 50 pula nyana o rota nwa direng ke gore a cancel charge le police la tele lone e be le tsa gongwe madi a tele sa re nya morena o tantsheng tsa tiro. I think we need to revisit how we do things, and also secondly we need to build independent institutions.
Yeah. Before we get to the institutions, I get it, the most basic, most fundamental social institution is the family.
Yes.
Yeah. Before we even get to those institutions, so ke batla go botsa
hela ka Setswana hela mo manyalo mo dintsho mo diparty ya ka reta bara boipuso ke lo le iraga. But hela me, I think at a family level we need to really inculcate that culture ya go ruta when you socialize our kids into society even le go di kerekeng kwa ra ko di bolong go tlhela within all the spheres of society where we could possibly interact as human beings. We need to really have this kind of conversation. But at an institutional level, because kana corruption has been institutionalized, and the reason why the perception didn't say Botswana ka bontsi ba dumela gore nya corruption e teng mo Botswana ebile ya diragala ke gore we don't have independent institutions tse le gore they can combat corruption. Ha re lebella gongwe bone bo DCC yana go pekwana wana o twa go tenya mo kamedi wa teng o ntshitswe ka moso hirilo o ntshitswe. There is no that security of channel gore gongwe ha le gore ga tomotheo wa appointilwe, he can maybe say gore my mandate as a DCC head ke gore ke taga di strategy tsa go tshwana le tse gore ke gone go lwantsha corruption in this span. So there isn't that continuity in terms of even our laid out strategies tsa go lwantsha corruption. I don't think we are doing that much to really educate. Yes, public education is there, but it has been there forever. Look at the campaigning, but I don't think people really understand this animal that we call corruption and its consequences, because its consequences are very, very dire to an extent that it can collapse the economy, and in some instances it has really led to a shrinking economy, and but well over tota ha hitileng teng go nna tshenyo go ha go sia
arbue ikobeng ka khanya campaign funding go ka fundiwa ga diparty tsa politiki kana Motlhopheng during the campaign trail. Go le gantsi ra tle re utlwe dikgang tsone tsa campaign funding di linkiwa le dikgang tsa corrupt practices. Ona utlwa go na le semamang wa madimadi wa mohumi wa dinaledi wa ileng gore o ntshitse madi a rileng a nela a particular political party kana a nela Motlhopheng mongwe kgotsa go nna le kgang tsone tseo tsa gore motho wa gore o elangwe ka gore tota o diragatsa dikgatlhego tsa motho o mongwe. So there comes an instance where now there is seemingly a lack of sincerity in a party eleng gore e bua ka corruption mme e langwe ka tsela e ntseng jana. How do you tease that out as a voter?
I think it's very important to be honest with ourselves and to promote a culture of integrity. When we talk about political party funding, we need to be very transparent. That's why I said at the onset that if at all, while opposition parties or a specific party that is committed to fighting corruption, and then we say bale ba irase, bale ba dirase, le rona tshwantse re itebele, we need to introspect and see gore what are we doing wrong as far as corruption is concerned. We need to promote transparency. We need to decentralize information whereby there's no speculation, there's no slander or anything. We put it out there for the people to see gore reyo ka ha kana umphile 100 pula so I can further this and to ensure that I publish reports to that end gore kana 100 pulo ne ke rekile metsi ne ke dirile se. So it's very important gore le rona re itebele as individuals as well as political parties gore what are we doing in our parties, what culture are we fostering?
Bua ka makgotla a bolomatsebe gongwe ka tsamaiso tsa bolomatsebe tse ra tleng go re utlwe go buiwa ka ga tsone. I'm speaking to you now as a social commentator. I have been, making tse ke tlhakanya dikgang tsa teng. Me yaanong ka bo ke batla gore re lebelle kgang e re tsweledisa e ya dikarolo tse di harologanyeng tsa matshelo a rona le gone gore re bona corruption mo go tsone. So how can it be avoidable? It's as unavoidable as death or taxes. So, when we look at different social aspects of life, ra bona gore ga re bua ka gongwe music. Kwa America ba tle ba dirisa le go kola payola. Bo go duelwang DJ gore a tshameke music wa gago. Mo moeng a o fe rotation e botokanyana, a o fe publicity e botokanyana. When we talk about the film industry, there's a concept called couch casting, where the director perhaps asks for sexual favors in order to cast somebody. So this quid pro quo kind of setup, that's a colloquial way of saying it in terms of situations sa pereko. Mo go teng ya ntsha sengwe yanong le wena o tlo bone promotion e o e batla kana o tlolela ene o iphitlhele le hape lenyana. How then are we expecting a level of reality to the rhetoric that is being said in manifestos regarding corruption when there's this kind of pervasiveness? Corruption mo dikarolong tsotlhe tsa botshelo.
I think society on its own needs to reorientate itself, because if you don't change, like you are saying, even more in journalism, there's what you call brown envelope journalism.
Yes.
That would amount to an unethical practice. Would say is a corrupt practice. Even bonebo payola ba obano unzo babua. I think what we need to do is really we need to build a culture of integrity whereby we place ethics at the center of what we do. Because even at the government level, if you are a minister, you should know that when you preside over these funds, it's a society or it's a public, they are not necessarily yours. So whenever you get that temptation, just think of 10 kilometers barefooted in those rural areas to school, or the mother who travels such distances go belega go sena ha tsena ka ibile o twa go ta gona ambulance e lore e ka motsa ya mo isa to the nearest hospital go le gore go na le go le gore o ka belegisetswa teng, or maybe nkuku e le gore ga tsena go spateleng o twa go ta ga gona dipilisi tsa high blood, me ano tshwantse gore a tsamaye a dikologa Gaborone othe ka 7 pulo na motshwere wa bohelo gore nka ba ile gore ke ena no nka ba gongwe a rekile le gunyanyana ano. So whenever you think of doing whatever that we deem as corruption, think of the repercussions tse le gore they are there. Gongwe banana ba ile gore ba runtswa tshwanelo ya go a sekolo, gongwe dithefo sa kgone go sponsora palo e rileng ka ngwago, because it is because of all this waste that goes on in governments because of your issue corruption. Then how then do we tighten such gaps to see to it that we bring perpetrators to book? I think our law enforcement or our investigating bodies need to really sniff around and really spare nobody when it comes to corruption. Hello, what is a minister? Then you don't have to spare him, even if he's maybe ke motho e le gore the highest person in the land. Could it be the president or whatever? Even though maybe there could be a law of immunity, but we need to set precedents in terms of when we prosecute. Let us prosecute from the least person to the top. Ha le gore gongwe ke mme le gore o bereka le cleaner sa se le gore ko sekolong kwa go chaiswa o taka broom ko lapeng ke senyeso se tšhaba le gone ha se gore a le gore ke mmasape ko sekolong sa se le tsa jutaro le batha le borotho ka moso ga gona borotho ko sekolong ba thaela kana batha ya thaela ke senyeso se tšhaba go ma so re senyeso se tšhaba hela ke ha go to go jelwe madi. So all within our spheres la go le go na le Setswana se se reng re mothe se se reng ha te pudi at the Asia high boheletsweng teng. I think we need to really do away with such kind of thinking because ke tsontse ile gore di rutwetsa go senya tota gore ha ile gore o boheletswe mo Duma FM ano gore wa go senya mo Duma FM kana ha ile gore o boheletswe go gongwe wa go senya teng. I think that is a wrong mentality ile gore re ka skere ka on. And also maybe I think hela le rona hela we need to have an honest conversation with ourselves when we go to this elections 2024 gore gone me what is it that we want as a society? Do you want gore re nne re ntse re la hela ka tshenyetso se shabana kana re hela gore re batla go tswella re la ka tshenyetso se shaba? You know, you are empowered to register and to vote. It is your constitutional right to make sure that you vote whoever that you deem gore can serve you better gongwe and as a senye go hitisa gongwe ba bangwe.
Yeah. So as a voter, how do you propose that the electorate is able to hold political parties accountable for pronouncements on how they are going to tackle corruption gore ba go itebaganya le eng in terms of issues of governance? How as a voter
Okay.
are you empowered to do so? Get up beyond just ka tlhopho ya gago.
I think as a voter, oftentimes we just resort to certain tactics in order to speak out about our grievances as far as corruption is concerned. For instance, the headlines that I've talked about earlier on, there's a corruption scandal. We go on social media and we make jokes and make memes and everything. Sometimes we don't vote, we don't participate and exercise our rights as Botswana. I think as Botswana, we also need to use these hotlines that exist about DCEC and ombudsman and everything and report areas or situations whereby we believe that corrupt acts actually taking place. We need to step up and not just be docile and have that feeling of helplessness. We need to ensure that there's a certain level of cohesion amongst these oversight institutions, such that we don't exist in silos or exist in a vacuum or act independently. If I'm a civil society organization or if I'm like BCPI or Motheo Mosha or any other organization that has to do with governance, we need to have a convergent point with DCEC, DPP, and all these other oversight institutions. Not just talking about that independence, which is very vital. We also need to see some sort of synergy amongst these organizations, such that in different directions, and we can be able to see the results of the mandate that they were charged with. As Motlhophi, it's important that we utilize and we empower ourselves by reading up further about corruption and actually ensuring that the cycle of corruption ends with us. In a certain way that is not in line with ethics. I should talked about earlier on when it comes to hiring or employing people, you find that for me to be able to obtain this job, I need to exchange certain sexual favors, which actually perpetrates and further exacerbates a cycle whereby there's gender-based violence, and that's something that we need to stop.
Yeah. In your own view, le Motlhophi, is it a deal breaker gore a party sa bue go lekane ka dikgang tsa corruption?
Definitely. It is a deal breaker because, like I said, really the youth especially, were affected by corruption because it's very hard for us to obtain jobs because you have to do certain things that are unethical and things that are shunned by society in order to obtain those opportunities. So if at all a political party that I want to join or be part of actually is contributing to that problem, it does not make sense for me to partake in it because no, I'm going to be corrupted by that bad behavior.
Ke batla go amakanya governance le yone. Ha re bua ka governance re ka se re bua ka ga yone re sa bua ka dikgang tsa accountability, re bua ka dikgang tsa checks and balances. You know, ha re lebella the three arms of government, whereby we're looking at the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Re tshwanna ke gore re bone all these three arms go na le ka ha ba checkanang ka teng gore o mongwe a ska iphitlhelanong e ka re o heketsa o mongwe ka tsamaiso. Are we seeing that, the separation of power? I mean, it's a whole new topic, but in terms of issues of governance and in terms of issues of rule of law, how might you gauge us?
Thank you for that good question. You know, the Constitution of Botswana, it spells out that there should be that separation of powers. The legislative, then there should be the executive, and there should be the judiciary. The legislative, ke gone go le gore ke ma parlamente go molao yirwang teng gore Botswana ba thopa. Then we have a national assembly that shall make laws, review the policies tse le gore di teng, and so forth and so on. Then the executive ke yone le go rise go ra agree ke yone le re na le di minister bo tona gona le a lo bona bo tautona. Then the judiciary ki our judicial processes which are presided over by Honorable Chief Justice or le di judge bo magistrata go lo ra itsheka teng. But in terms of whether there is that separation of powers when you talk of good governance, I think we can say that there is, even though there are some who argue that there's interference. Maybe the executive powers are interfering with the judiciary, because as we might have seen, maybe Modi Pampiring, you know, in the past few years, those allegations, there are some judges still or the case minister. So I think if that is the truth and happened or is happening, we are not supposed to be seeing that, because you know, there should be those checks and balances. The judiciary should be able to preside over cases without taking sides. It concerns a minister, it concerns the president, and also Parliament should be able to come up with independent laws and should be independent of the executive. That is why some have argued, you know, it really defies logic why we should have members of cabinet who are also maybe MPs. Why can't we just have people by cabinet, they don't sit in the National Assembly, because you know, but the roles are they duplicate. And when you look at it from that perspective, there's also that issue the vast powers that the Constitution gives him so much power, and that is not a good maybe for governance, because if the president wills so much power, you can imagine how that power can be misused, because the law empowers him to do almost when you talk about the topo appoint secretary one net and IEC announce di topo they are honaling appointang chief justice appoint the minister the constitutional review there was that proposal appoint 10 specially elected members of parliament appoint head of DCC babu DIS I think appoint the judicial service commission. When you talk of the judge tautuna so tautuna in a constitutional law or in a constitutional democracy like ours, maybe some argue that maybe his powers should be reduced so that there should be that separation of powers, and to see to it that there's good governance.
Right. Re tsamela go bokhutlong jwa puisong ya rona. Go tla go bua gote effective governance requires that the law be applied equally. Go se ka ga nna le ope o leng gore gongwe o tsewa ka letsogo le legolo at the expense of another person. In your day-to-day interactions, le ka ha wena o bona dilo di ntse ka teng o le Motlhophi, would you say that the law is applied equally or applied selectively, if not enforced or manipulated to favor others?
I think, from my perception, the law is not applied equally. I believe that we always talk about rule of law, but oftentimes we don't actually do things that reflect that there is rule of law. We find that some people are actually above the law in certain instances, such that if I have a case of rape or there are rape allegations against me, we find that the case just goes up in a plume of smoke. And for me as a voter, it's like, if I was in that position, if I had done something that is contrary to the law, then the law would have actually cracked the whip on me. But for other people who have a certain amount of wealth, for some people who have a certain amount of political connections, the law is not applied the same way it would have been to me. So therefore, I could not say that there is rule of law or that the law is fair or is applied fairly to each and every single Motswana.
Right. So what is the starting point to ensure the attainability and feasibility of the promises that are made within these manifestos? Gore re kala jang wena o le Motlhophi o ikalla jang gore se le gore sa buiwa ka maruri sa diragala kana se ka diragadiwa?
It just basically boils down to information and access to that information. I believe that information is power. I think that we need to leverage technology in terms of disseminating information about corruption and ensuring that we can be able to see a trail of, okay, how much of that was accomplished. With social media, we can utilize it to actually disseminate information just at the click of a button to a lot of people all over the country. And going just beyond that, Rona, as the voters, it's also up to us to actually ensure that we're not ignorant and that we don't have this mentality or it doesn't serve me, therefore I have no interest in partaking in it. When it comes to issues such as governance, integrity, transparency, and accountability, it's important that haki tlhokomologe, because I believe that it's for, say, academics or it's for politicians, and I have no vested interest in following it. It's very important gore ke khone go nna up to date with current affairs in my country and to be able to know gore ha le gore ke a bona gore motho o utswile, what do I do? Ha le gore ke a go reporta ko police and the case doesn't go anywhere, what is the chain of command? How do I follow up and ensure that my requests are acceded to?
Right. Gabo, a re wetse jalo, re lebelle kgang e in terms of, corruption undermining democratic institutions, diverting public resources to personal enrichment, ga no ka hamolaetsa gongwe e le khakollo mo bakwading ba tsone di manifesto tse kana these promises that are made, what do you think should be done differently in terms of ensuring that there's plausibility or feasibility in the promises made or the rhetoric and what actually is attainable?
Okay. I think before we go Arabella, I'd just like to pass by a point that Ghana, Botswana is a very peaceful country. It's a very democratic country. But in one point we are going to see what has been transpiring of which and when the people shall have nothing to eat, they shall eat the rich. So I don't think we should really arrive at that point whereby people will be tired because of corruption. Now they want to eat rich people. But now to answer you, in terms of manifestos, how manifestos should be crafted if they are to align with this issue of fighting corruption. I think first and foremost, political parties need to stipulate what kind of laws they will put in to really curb corruption, because when you go through those manifestos, corruption, public education, but you don't see laws spelled out. This is how the how part of it, you don't see it coming clearly. So I think let us invest in researching about this topic, corruption, or how are other countries faring corruption. Maybe we could borrow a little from them to say can we copy their strategies to come and implement them here? Because the benchmark, let's benchmark and come and craft better maybe manifestos so that they can specifically target this issue of corruption.
Right. Thank you so very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Ke ka haro tsang ka teng tsa tsatsi la gompieno kgang e le gore ne re itebagantse le yone ke kgang ya tshenyetso setšhaba e be re boa re lebella kgang ya governance in Botswana jaaka re tsamaela ko ditlhophong tsa lehatshe la Botswana. It's going to be very, very important to see how different political parties communicate the message of anti-corruption mo di manifestong tsa bone in terms of their promises and how attainable, how feasible, how actionable these promises are, and how the electorate can hold them to account for not living up to those promises. Ke ka haro etsang ka teng tsatsi la gompieno ke na Tumisa Mothei re tla kopana gape mo nakong e tlang mo thulaganyong yone ya Motlhophi BUA. Thank you and goodbye.